Yay. Okay. Okay, guys. Thanks for joining me this morning for strategic understanding of the Trek 1 to 4 contract. This is a 1 hour continuing education contracts class. So, as I said, those of you who need it, please put your name and license number in the chat, and then also send the $10 to the Venmo account. That's less important than the putting your name in for the credit. But we've got a mixture of advisors on here from all different levels of experience. So we've got some who are pretty brand new or brand new to Texas at least, and others of us who are very, very seasoned. So I want to, I always encourage, dialogue, interaction, people sharing, horror stories they've had, when we are discussing certain things. So, you know, be interactive, interrupt me, share, etc., ask questions. Okay. So Trek 1 to 4 contract, and this is the new version. So I know we've been talking and I've done multiple classes, legal minutes, etc., on the changes that came down that were announced in November, became effective the first of the year. So we will touch on those. Those mostly have to do with paragraph 12 and then the survey section, but we're going to cover the whole contract today. Okay, so we're just going to go section by section. So parties to the contract, buyer, the seller and the buyer. So things that get tricky on this sometimes might be if it's an estate, if it's an estate, the tax rolls may not have changed yet. It may say John Smith, but John Smith has passed, and now really the legal entity that owns it is the estate of John Smith. So just be aware of that. Another situation might be if someone bought it when they were single and now they are married. So, because of community property laws in Texas, both people will ultimately have to, sign the deed when it's transferred. But so you should add that. It's not imperative that that be done on the front end. Because someone's not a buyer's not necessarily going to know that. They're going to look in the tax rolls and see it's John Smith, but now it's John Smith and his wife Mary Smith. But the title, you'll have to do an amendment at some point. But if you can get it right, that's great. The buyer, whoever's going to hold the name and title. Sometimes people buy a home and they don't know, are they going to own it as themselves, or are they going to create an entity? Do they have an entity or a trust um they may want prefer it to? So it's always best, you can just kind of a good rule of thumb, if you write, like, if John Smith is the buyer, in this case, say John Smith and or assigns. Just that way, they're agreeing, the seller's agreeing up front that you can change the legal entity from the buyer to someone else. So, and it may be, put in the buyer's name, the husband's name, but it's going to become the wife or something. So putting and in or signs, if you think that could be a situation, is always wise. Next section is the property description. This is where you do the legal description. Always encourage you guys not to just rely what is typed in on the Netris sheet. Pull up the tax rolls and just double check, because this is how the title company is going to pull title for the commitment, and just make sure everything is correct. So you put the address and the zip code at the end, but it's really that lock and block and subdivision number. So improvements, this all things that are classified here as improvements transfer with the property. So all fixtures and improvements that are attached to the real property, including permanently installed and built-in items. So includes appliances, valances, screens, shutters, awnings, ceilings, fans, wiring, outdoor cooking equipment, etc. One thing I just a couple of things, just talking of horror stories that we've had in the past couple of years. We always seem to have issues with beverage refrigerators, like wine refrigerators. They are not, as a general rule, built in. They are slipped into a cabinet space. The cabinet space maybe has been designed specifically for the dimensions of it, but just make sure when you are doing a contract, if you are the buyer and you're assuming that that beverage fridge is going to stay, that you add that as a real proper, as a non-realty item. So now, of course, if they've advertised beverage fridge, and stuff, you've got a better argument, but I cannot tell you how many times someone has closed on a house. They get the keys, get to the house, and they're like, wait, what is this empty space here in the kitchen cabinets? It's supposed to be the beverage fridge. So be very careful about that. Um, also, make sure it's really and truly installed. We had another situation involving an outdoor kitchen type thing. It was huge and piped in, but technically it wasn't installed, and the sellers took it with them, and the buyers freaked out. They actually went to small claims court on this. So just be overly communicative about things that you want to exclude, or things that the buyer wants, expects to stay. So similarly, accessories, window units, fireplace screens, it's kind of ambiguous out there. Clearly, if a fireplace screen is attached, kind of the old school where it's kind of built into the firebox, but there's argument out there in situations where the cute fireplace screens you buy, for $100, that those are considered to stay. So if you think, because it's an accessory to the fireplace, and even though it's not attached, so if if there's one of those, no matter what side you're on, and you want it, make sure you clearly say that. Okay, and then of course all the controls, and software. And there's another section later in the contract we'll get to that talks about, the apps. So, the Ring doorbell and all of that stuff stays. And then, the controls include software, apps, and hardware used solely to control improvements or accessories. So yeah, even though you control, certain elements of your house with an iPhone, that doesn't stay because it's not solely is the word. So remotes and special things really, related just to those. Um, exclusions, again, exclusions are things the seller wants to keep. So this is a conversation you should have at your listing appointment, and just so and it's top of mind, and you can put it in the NetTrust listing. Like, let's say there's a mirror in the bathroom, or a special chandelier, that's been in the family for generations. To be sure to exclude that. And then E is reservations for minerals, oil, gas, etc. Um, and then next is the sales price. So sales price um, is divided into the part that is being financed and the part that is being um, that is that they're paying cash for. So you'll need to get those amounts. It should correspond. Of course, as a buyer's agent, you should be in communication with the buyer's lender. And, the lender letter will say, is it an 80-20 loan? Is it a 90-10 loan, etc. So when you fill in those amounts accordingly, and let me jump to the third party financing addendum, because um, this will be the addendum that is attached every time you have um, a transaction, sorry, that is financed. And the amounts in the sales price section of the contract will correspond with the amounts in the third party financing addendum. So first mortgage loan in the amount of blank. So assuming you're just doing one loan, that's going to be the amount that you have in paragraph 3B. and you put the number of years and the interest, usually the interest rate that they've quoted you. And so that's for conventional. Similarly, if you're doing any of these other types of financing, FHA, VA, etc., other financing, this is this is something they added a couple of years ago because we've seen a lot of instances where people are doing hard money loans or, you know, borrowing from another source, maybe a family member or something like that. So and it's a little different, a little looser sometimes than the provisions on A. So approval of financing, and there are two separate approvals in this financing addendum. So the first one is the buyer and the second one is property. So buyer approval means that this contract is subject to buyer obtaining buyer approval, and that if the buyer cannot obtain it, then the buyer may terminate within X number of days after the effective date. By giving a notice of termination and a copy of a written statement from the lender setting forth the reason for a lender's determination. Okay, that last sentence that I just read, a copy of the statement from the lender setting forth the reasons for a lender's determination, that is new language that was added with this latest contract, with this latest contract change that just came into effect. And this is a good change. So the buyer approval means that it has everything to do with the buyer, nothing to do with the property. It means that they're looking at the buyer's credit, their income and debt ratios, and all of that stuff to see if they're worthy. It has nothing to do with the house. It's just looking at the buyer. So before, when that sentence wasn't there, what people were doing was they were using this as a out, and I thought this was really unethical in my opinion. They would, you're past, let's say you had 7 day option period, and then you had 12 days in here. Well, on day 11, if the buyer just changed their mind for any reason, they would just send a termination saying, I'm terminating under the buyer approval section of the third party financing addendum, and they didn't have to have any backup. So people could just be faking it, and there is nothing, the way it was written, there is nothing it could do. So this just keeps everything above board, that, it really does have to do with buyer approval instead of just, waking up on a whim, 5 days after the option period, but still in the buyer financing period and saying, I'm gonna terminate this contract. The
So
second,
when did they, sorry to interrupt you, when did they make that change? And so do you have to have a letter from the lender stating that?
yes, yes, this is a brand new change. It's in the brand new version of the contract that became effective on January 3rd. So if you find
Oh,
out from
thank
your
you for
lender,
letting us.
pardon?
I said I wasn't aware of it. I always thought it wasn't fair for, a buyer just to back
Yes,
out. Yeah, so
yes,
that's
I
good
know.
that they
So I think
changed
this is,
it.
yeah, I think this is a very good change. So I was really happy to see it when they put that in there. Okay, so the next section, which is B, the property approval, this has nothing to do with the buyer, everything to do with the property. So this is if the buyer's lender determines that the property does not satisfy lender's underwriting requirements for the loan, including but not limited to appraisal, insurability, and lender required repairs, and the buyer may terminate on or before the third date before closing by giving seller notice of termination and a copy of the written statement setting forth the reasons for the lender's determination. So that paragraph has had they had to have something from the lender, and saying why, and usually it's either it's a bad appraisal, or like, it needs a new roof and the seller's not willing to do a new roof, and that thus they can't get insurance. So they've just added that requirement, to make it a real requirement. So again, this paragraph is really important when you are waiting for an appraisal, that you are watching those days, because what you don't want to happen is, you're getting close to the closing date, and it's the third day before closing and you don't have your appraisal and it comes in 2 days before closing and it's a low appraisal, well, your buyer now cannot exercise this right to terminate, or realistically what happens is you usually negotiate, some kind of relief from the seller to lower the price to cover, the difference. But you do have no leverage as the buyer once that third day has passed. So just be very mindful, stay on the lender about that. If you see something happening, if you're getting, if if it's looking bad, see if you can, amend the contract accordingly. I don't know why the seller would want to necessarily, because that just gives the buyer an out. But just be very, very mindful and always keep that date when the appraisals, when that third day before closing, and the appraisal. Yeah. And so we're going back to the other contract now. That's really the main things. Okay. So that's sales price. Leases. So on this contract, they added this section, Trek added this section, it's probably been about 4 years ago now, that if there are leases associated with the property, then you have to disclose them, provide them, etc. Now, to make a clarification, this is not a lease back. This is not, having to do, the seller's going to close and they want to lease the house back for a month. That is separate. So that's the seller's temporary lease back. These are leases with third parties. Okay, so the residential lease, this is if the seller is leasing potential all or part of the property. So could be, it's been an investment property and they've got a long-term tenant there. Could be they have a house with a back house and they've got a tenant in the apartment above the garage. So either of those situations would get the residential, would trigger this. So if it's subject to one or more residential leases, there's a corresponding addendum, the residential lease addendum. It's a TREC form. It's in ReChat and zip forms. So, and you have to show that, all there's provisions within it. You've got to provide the lease and the terms, and if there's any changes, give it to them. So, all of these provisions are in here just to make sure the seller is providing buyer with all the information, about the house, financially, accessibility, etc. So that's why this is here. The next one is the fixture lease. If there's a fixture lease related to the property, solar panels, propane tank, security systems. The main thing we're seeing right now is the solar panels. So, and a big distinction, and if you have a seller who is listing a house that has solar panels out, ask them to go ahead, take a look at their paperwork. That should be like on your list.
Thank you. You're the best.
Someone has their mic off. Maybe Jennifer, are you not muted? I don't know.
Oh, am I not?
Sorry. Uh,
Sorry.
uh-huh. So a lot of these solar panel situations, they are not leases. They're like a financing deal, like a lease to own. So you need to be aware of what that is, because if it is a lease to own, then the fixture lease, you wouldn't check this, but there may be provisions within that agreement that they have to do to transfer the ownership. So just be aware of that nuance with the fixture leases. And the natural, and there is a corresponding TREC addendum for the fixture leases, like there is for residential leases. The next one is natural resource leases, oil, gas, geothermal. We see this a lot more with ranch and land and in the Fort Worth side of town than we do in the Dallas side of town. But if you do, you have to provide them. And there is not a separate addendum, kind of this language here on 1 and 2 about the sellers delivered a copy of the lease and etc. That's language that's similar to the actual addendums that TREC created for residential and fixture. Okay, move it on. Earnest money and termination option. delivery of earnest money is due within 3 days after the effective date of the contract. And you state where the title company is, and how much earnest money. That's a negotiated term. 1%'s kind of been standard, although I'm now seeing in Dallas, like in the Park Cities, I'm seeing 2% becoming more of a standard. So I don't know if the whole, industry's going that way, but somewhere between 1 and 2% is what's standard for earnest money. And then the option fee is also due at that 3-day period to the title company. Um, and the buyer can either do that together in one transaction or as 2 separate transaction. This paragraph you'll see down here on E, in big bold letters, time is of the essence for this paragraph, and strict compliance with the time for performance is required. So this means that when they say 3 days, it's a hard 3 days. Now, the one exception is, as it will say on number 2, if the last day to deliver the earnest money option fee or additional earnest money falls on a Saturday, Sunday, or legal holiday, the time to deliver the earnest money option fee, etc., is extended to the end of the next day. That is not a Saturday, Sunday, or legal holiday. So if you execute a contract on a Thursday, day 1's Friday, Saturday, Sunday. So it would be due on Monday. So because that is the next business day. If someone would have executed a contract this past Thursday, it wouldn't be due until today, Tuesday, because Monday was a legal holiday. So 3 days. But if you execute on a Monday, it's going to be Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. It's going to be due Thursday by close of business whenever the title company receives it. Termination option, the option fee. So for nominal consideration, the seller grants buyer the unrestricted right to terminate this contract by giving notice to the seller within blank days after the effective date, which is the option period. Notices must be given by 5 p.m. by the date specified. So this again falls under that time is of the essence, strict compliant with the timing. So, and that it says 5 p.m. Now it doesn't matter with the option fee if it's on a Sunday or a legal holiday. It's just the delivery of the funds, because that's to the title company, which is a business entity. So if you have an option that it expires at 5 p.m. on a Sunday or on 5 p.m. on Christmas Day, that's when it expires. So, and so it is key that, you terminate it by that time. So, failure to deliver earnest money. If buyer fails to deliver earnest money within the time required, seller may terminate this contract. So what does that mean? That means, let's say your person flaked and they didn't deliver the earnest money. The contract is not necessarily dead. It's not void. It's voidable, which means that if the seller can say, okay, yeah, I get it. I don't have any other offers. They say they're going to get it, to me by tomorrow, day 5, and then you accept it, that's fine. Then the contract's still alive. But if you, let's say day 3's passed, day 4, and you just got another contract in, that's even better. You can say, sorry, buyer, you defaulted by not delivering the earnest money. So I'm terminating this contract, and you're gone. And, now I'm not under contract, so I can accept, another offer. So that's how that works with earnest money. Now, whereas D, failure to deliver option fee, if no dollar amount is stated in option fee, so if you put 0, then you're just saying you don't want an option. Or if buyer fails to deliver the option fee within the time required, buyer shall not have the unrestricted right to terminate. So, failure to, so different than failure to deliver earnest money. If they don't deliver, if they miss the option delivering the option fee, they don't have an option. So whereas, um, so it's different. So anyway, that is how that works. Any questions on the timing of delivery for the option and the earnest? All right, then we'll move on to title and survey. So title policy, the seller shall furnish to buyer at either buyer or seller's expense an owner title policy issued by, you put the title company. So again, checkbox on who pays for it totally depends on the market, how hot the property is, on who pays for this. I'd say historically in Texas, the seller pays for it. When the market was so super hot a couple of years ago, we were seeing 90% of the time buyer was paying for it. So again, I would say the assumption is the seller. Now, if it's a multiple offer deal or something, then that could be a term that the buyer might want to put in to sweeten the pot, to the seller. So, and then y'all, if you just Google Texas mortgage calculator, or I'm sorry, Texas title insurance calculator, you can figure out these amounts. So if someone's asking you, how much is the title policy, it's regulated by the state. So just put that amount in and it'll tell you. So you can, give them an amount. Um, so the title policy, there's certain things that are, so a title policy, it's covering the history of the land, saying that you have good title to it, that there's no one else making claims, etc. So that, if someone came up from, 100 years ago, this is protecting you. So, and every time you do, all mortgage properties, all lenders are going to require a title policy. I've had several people do deals, small cash deals and stuff over the last couple of years where they waived it. I don't think that's a good idea. And again, if you are doing anything that's mortgage, then you don't have a choice. You have to have it. Um, so the next question, and so these exceptions, these are things that are not covered by the title policy. So, and like these are standards. So restrictive covenants, uh, utility easements, so printed exceptions for title. We don't really have that. Title lands, beaches, discrepancies in area 8. This is if there is an issue with a neighboring, usually with a neighboring property, or with how the survey is. This is an extra layer of protection you can get, and I always do it for my clients. I think it's good. It's like 5% of the title policy, so what's that? If it was a $10,000 title policy, would that be $500? I think that would be right. So, and it just gives you some extra protection in case there is some type of a shortages in areas. So, and I think that's usually, again, it's a checkbox. I'd say more times than not on this one, even if the seller is buying the title policy, the buyer usually will opt to pay for this extra layer. So the commitment is like the preliminary title policy. You can't actually issue the policy until closing happens and the buyer now owns the property. The commitment is just kind of, like I said, the pre-policy that's showing what the policy is going to look like. And so within 20 days, it says the seller shall furnish. Well, but it's really the title company who's doing this. So, and that they have to, furnish the policy and all of, restrictive covenants, and exceptions, and, deliver it. So it gives the title company, if for whatever reason the title company can't get all of the historical information, all, going back 100 years or however long the subdivision, and house or developed, then it gives them an automatic 15 days. So we don't see that. We don't see that too much. I think, this is probably more of an issue like in rural type areas and ranch and land than, in town subdivision-y kind of places. Okay, this survey. Now, this is another big change that just came down along with the commission changes that took place recently. So, survey. Within blank days after the contract, so there's three things we can do here. So either the buyer is going to obtain a new survey, or the seller is going to obtain a new survey. Okay, so those are kind of easy. So those are easy. You're getting a new survey. So, some people, like Zareen says, every time she works with a buyer, she's like, that's like her thing, just for their protection. She thinks you should always get a new survey as a buyer. So even if they have one from when they bought the house, it just gives you more protection. You've got privity of contract with the surveyor if there ever is an issue. So, and then some situations you have to, that it was a builder, it's a new construction, and the survey they have, was before the house was built. But what we see a lot is this first paragraph being checked, which is when you're trying to use an existing survey. And it says within blank number of days after effective date, seller shall furnish to buyer an existing survey and a real property affidavit or declaration promulgated by the Texas Department of Insurance. So this new document, which is an option, we know what the T41 is. The T41 is the affidavit that someone has been using to reuse a survey. You're saying, the survey was from 2010, and since 2010, I know nothing or only this, and you write in, what's been done to the property that's changed the survey has been done, and then you get it notarized. And then if both the lender and the title company are good with it, then no one has to buy a survey. So, $700-800. But, if not, then one party, then you check which party, either the seller or buyer, would be buying it. So what they just created is a new form that's an option to the T47. It's called the T47.1 declaration. It's just like the T47. You're saying the same thing, since the date of the survey, you don't know of anything that's been changed. But you don't have to have it notarized. So, which makes it a lot easier than, you had to have both parties. If, two parties owned the property, they both would have to do it. So this is much better. You're saying that you swear, so the person's doing it. Okay, here's the silly little glitch. You have to, on this new declaration, put your address and your date of birth. So if it was some person who was opposed to sharing their date of birth with anyone, that might be, I would say that would be like the only situation where I can see someone wanting to do the T47 and go through the hassle of trying to track down a notary versus just doing this T47.1. So that's the big change to that. So if that survey and either the T47 or the T47.1, is good, that's great. No one's now buying a survey. But if the title company, like I said, does not accept the survey, then someone's got to buy it. So it says then buyer shall obtain a survey at blank, either seller's or buyer's expense. Now, so what was kind of an issue before with the notarization, and I think this is going to really help with that, is you had to comply with this section and not have to buy a new survey. You had to supply both the old survey and the T47 within whatever number of days you inserted there. So if someone was slow getting it notarized, and here's the survey, but the husband hasn't signed his T47 yet, then the sellers wouldn't have complied by doing both of those, the T47 and this copy of the survey, and they'd have to buy the buyer a new survey. But again, I think it's going to be a lot easier now that we have this option of the T47.1. So, objections. Buyer may object to objections, defects, encumbrances to title that prohibit the following use or activity. Okay, so what you're going to, when you're going to use this paragraph, we see this all the time. People will write in there something like single family use. That means nothing. Okay, what you want to put in here is if you have a specific use that your person is buying the property for and would not be interested in the property if they weren't able to do something. For instance, construction of an in-ground swimming pool. Okay, so you get the survey back. You haven't seen the survey, you get the survey back and you see there's a big old easement running down the middle of the yard, and if you put in construction of a swimming pool and then you get this, then you could terminate the contract based on that. Otherwise, if it was blank and you hadn't put, construction of a swimming pool and you get the survey back and there's the easement, sorry, you don't have an out for that reason. So something, let's see, another couple of things that are good to put in there. Short-term rentals. If you want to do, we're seeing, especially in subdivision, HOA, mandatory HOA type neighborhoods, that they're outlawing, short-term rentals. So that might be something you put in there. Another one might be if you were planning to build a house, so that you would put something like, you could either do setbacks, say, setbacks no more than, 5 feet on the sides and 20 feet in the front, or construction of a house of at least 5,000 square foot, or construction of 2-story house, etc. So just if you do have a specific use, this is what you would put this to just give your buyers the outs. If for some reason when you delve into the survey and the title work, you're going to learn that what they want to do is not allowable. All right. Title notices. Okay, the whole bunch of different things in here. So membership and property owner association. So if it is part of a mandatory HOA, then there is a mandatory HOA document that must be attached to the contract. So, and that is very similar. That document is very similar to the language that's built into the condo contract, because all condos are part of a property association. So, and then, this provision goes on to, say in bold letters, you're obligated to pay assessments to the property owner association, the amount subject to change. Failure to pay assessments could force in the association's lien and the foreclosure of the property. So yeah, so it's, and they're big obligations. So, and the property associations have a lot of power. So, anyway, so that is what is used there. Statutory tax district. So this is if a property is situated in a utility or other statutorily created district for water, sewage, drainage, flood control. The seller has to deliver and the buyer must sign a statutory notice relating to the bond rate, indebtedness, etc. So this is the MUD section. So a MUD, the municipal utility district. So we see this, more in outlying areas and newer suburbs. But the MUD amounts can be substantial, and so this is required if you're listing a property. And you can usually tell if it's a MUD by the tax rolls. Like there'll be a line item for that, along with like school tax and hospital tax, etc. You can do that. But then the MUDs, you know, you can find the information. All the MUDs have a website, but it is imperative that you, as the listing agent with a property in the MUD, provide that information, or else the buyer has the right to terminate the contract during the contract period. So Tidewaters, there's some more notices there, but we really don't have those in Dallas Fort Worth. Annexation. So public improvement districts, this is similar to the MUD thing, the MUD disclosure. Property improvement district, which we refer to as a PID. These are all over the place. You know, there are a lot like the MUDs in kind of newer subdivisions, but there are even PIDs in town. There is a PUD in downtown Fort Worth. There is a PID in uptown Dallas. There is a PID in parts of downtown Dallas, downtown Plano. So, you know, definitely look into that, because similarly, there is an addendum about the notice, letting them know, because once again, there are fees related to it. And like for the pit, for the MUD, you know, if you don't provide it, the buyer has a right to terminate. So really, something you should always consider. If there are transfer fees, then the seller must notify the buyer. I know certain subdivisions have this, their transfer fees, and usually they're on the back end. So you got to think way ahead. I know Castle Hills out in Louisville and Carrollton has one. So you know that every time, so someone's buying a house now, they're not thinking about, oh, when I sell this house in 10 years, but when they sell that house in 10 years, there's a transfer fee, you know, of like $2,000 or $3,000. So that has to be disclosed as well. This number 11 is brand new in the mold remediation. So this is, if it has been remediated for mold, then you've got to provide a certificate of the mold remediation. And so there's always been a disclosure, or not always, but there is a disclosure in the Texas Association of Realtors disclosure form. So if you've checked that, then this will go hand in hand with that. And then if there's other any of the notices, like we mentioned, if you're giving these notices, list them out here. Like if you're giving the MUD or the PID or something, do that. Okay, property condition access, to inspections, utilities, that a seller shall permit buyer and buyer's agents access to the property at reasonable times. This always becomes an issue. What is reasonable? The buyer wants to go in there, bring their decorator, you know, et cetera, et cetera. The seller is like, these people are coming over every day. So you have to, you know, set the balance of what is reasonable. So, seller's disclosure, it's part of our best practices here at Briggs to get the notice up front, and so we can check this buyer has received the box. But if your buyer's buying a property and they haven't received the notice yet, then you put the number of days that the seller has to deliver the seller's disclosure notice, and then let's see, the buyer may terminate. If the buyer does not receive the notice by such and such date, buyer may terminate this contract at any time prior to closing, and the earnest money will be refunded. If seller delivers the notice, buyer may terminate this contract within 7 days after buyer receives the notice. So yeah, this is why it's so important to get them that notice up front, because let's say you know, you didn't have it and they've checked, you know, within 5 days of this, I'll give you the notice. And on day 4, they give it to you. We've got 7 days past that. So that's 11 days. Your option period's probably already up. And so when it's just a buyer out, that's lingering. It doesn't have to do with anything necessarily that's said in the seller's disclosure, but anything, it's just an out, just having to do with the delivery. Not required to furnish it. You know, there's a list of things, like if it's an estate, if it's a foreclosure, if it's a duplex and you're doing both sides, There's about 7 or 8 statutory reasons when you don't have to furnish it. What is not a reason is the seller has never lived there. The seller bought it to flip it and has never lived there. That is not a reason. He still has to do a seller's disclosure. So get that question all the time. Now, if it's brand new construction, well, first of all, you're using the new home contract, but a brand new construction is not required to do it. But but if you're using this track 1 to 4 completed construction, a flipper is not an exempt party. Okay, next has to do with the condition, property as is, or if property accepts the property provided that the seller does a specific repair. Most of the time you're going to be checking as is, and then it says that this doesn't preclude you from negotiation. Checking as is does not preclude buyer from inspecting the property and negotiating repairs and treatments. You would check probably as is if there's something you knew had to be done up front. Let's say they said, like in the listing description, seller will replace roof prior to closing. That's when you'd put, that's when you'd check to and put that back there. Lender required repairs. That would be something, the lender's requiring it. That's a roof, that's a foundation, things like that. Don't see that very much. So completion of the repairs, that this paragraph's been, slowly amped up through the years. Used to, it would say seller will complete repairs. And there was no standard. That could be seller out there, doing it all himself. Now it says that the repairs must be done with someone who is licensed, or if no license is required, they're commercially engaged in the trade of doing that, and that they've got to provide copies of work, scope of work, invoices and stuff. So, if you're just make sure you get all this documentation together, no matter which side you're on. So, and if the seller hasn't done this, then it's a reason for the buyer not to close until they get all of this documentation. So, residential home service contract. So, this is, y'all hear us talk about these a lot. Everyone has different opinion, but there is benefit to them. If an appliance goes out, this is for things like appliances, air conditioning systems, etc., versus things that you have property insurance for, which is for like catastrophes, like tornadoes and stuff. But this is, usually it's an amount, usually $1,000 plus minus, all depending on the size and amount of the house. A lot of first-time buyers really do want this. It gives them peace of mind, with they're all already freaked out about spending all their savings for a down payment, and then they're thinking, oh, what if the stove goes out, a month after I move in? And it's a good talking point for you when you're trying to, you know, talk them into having the confidence to buy. So, and then a seller, the seller's looking at their net, period. If they're asking for $1,000 for that and they got two offers, they just, factor in this $1,000. But okay, broker or agent disclosure. If either party, if you're buying a house or selling a house and you have an interest, or it's a family member, so parent, child, spouse, then you need to disclose it. And then 8B says broker's fees are in a separate written agreement. So we're going to talk a little more about that in just a second. Closing will be on or before blank date or within 7 days after objections made. And then it says what all is going to be done at closing. The seller is going to execute a deed that conveys the property. The buyer is going to provide good funds. They're going to, give all notices, etc. What is different here than in the earnest money section is that this is not a time is of the essence clause. So if you're set to close on the 15th and it's the 15th and the lender's like, oh, it's going to be one more day, it's still in underwriting, and you're not automatically in default. So there, and again, it's kind of a what's reasonable. If it's 2 days, probably it's okay. If it's a week, 2 weeks, then, there's an argument that the buyer's in default. And sometimes, you'll be in these situations and they're like, oh, it's coming, it's going to happen. And I mean, at some point, and again, it's a question of fact, the seller can say, forget this, that these, I'm moving on. And so if there's a contract, then the seller, I think is probably a lot more willing to terminate and go with the backup. But again, it's going to be probably there's like I said, there's no set law, so like at least a week-ish before they will be able um, to quote get rid of the first buyer and move on to the second. Possession, you put either if you're going to take possession upon closing and funding, or if you're going to do a temporary residential lease. Leases can only be for 60 days if you're doing the temporary lease. And I would, as a seller's agent, it's always good to have it's always good to have sorry, I'm losing my words, a deposit. Really, that's a buyer thing. So the seller's there and so yeah, as a buyer's agent, you should want them to have a deposit because it's going to be the seller still living there. And let's say in that 1 month they stay there, they s- scratch up the house when they're finally moving out. So it's good to have a deposit there. And then insurance for the possession. You should, the buyer's going to have insurance if they have a loan on the house, but the seller should keep their homeowner's insurance. Will go away when they sell, but they should get some type of a renter's insurance for their property. Smart devices, devices that connect to the internet for monitoring. The seller's supposed to deliver to the buyer information about access codes and then terminate all of their codes. And, as homes get smarter and smarter, I think it is good to, have as a buyer's agent on your checklist, schedule a time for you or your audiovisual person to go through the house, shortly before closing with the seller and have them walk you through how everything works. Because we hear things all the time, oh, I can't open the door. I don't know how to do this. And just to make sure everyone, because there is so much technology in some of these houses. Okay, special provisions for additional information. This is if you need any legal language, that's what Zareen and I are here for. So please reach out to us for that, because you do not want to be practicing law without a license. So, but we are happy to do that and do it every day. Okay. And now we are at the big change. So this is the settlement and other expenses. So this is where commission is now addressed. If you recall, back when the NAR lawsuit stuff happened over the summer, and the Texas Association of Realtors developed all the new forms, the listing forms, the buyer's rep forms. One of the forms they developed was the 2406 addendum regarding brokers fees. And it was kind of awkward because Texas Association of Realtors is like our trade organization, and TREC is like the government entity, the regulating entity of realtors. And they're the ones who promulgate these contracts, but yet it was the Texas Association of Realtors who made this amendment or addendum to this contract. So two different entities. So we knew this was coming, and that on the next version of of the forms. Probably that language that was in the 2406 was going to go away and be merged into this, and indeed that is what has happened. Okay, so a little background on that. So historically, this section has been used when the seller is going to pay a fee on the buyer's behalf. And it would, sometimes you would see it on the front end of the contract when they were putting in a, like, let's say it's a first time buyer, and they're counting all their pennies to make the down payment. They, maybe they'd ask for $5,000, $10,000, an amount not to exceed blank. So and they put it in there. When we'd see it probably even more would be when we were negotiating repairs. And there's this repair, that repair, all needed. And the seller doesn't want to go through the hassle of doing all of the repairs, having 6 different tradesmen come out. They want to give a lump sum to the buyer. Right. So then we'd say, okay, we're going to give you $6,000 for these repair. And then on the amendment, there is a line that said, we're going to put this in paragraph 12. Okay, so that's still there, and you can still do all of that for like general type fees. But what has changed is that they've added this section here. It's called B, and it says that the following amount to be paid to brokerage fees that buyer has agreed to pay, and you put in either a dollar amount or a percentage amount. So, this is what is going to be used sometimes. This is not going to be, at this point, something you use all the time. What you will still have, as you recall, one of the documents, it was around, but they kind of changed it, that came out this summer, was the 2402 compensation agreement between brokers. And that's when a listing agent is going to pay the buyer's agent a commission, right? So you've gotten a listing agreement, and you've gotten it for both sides. You've gotten it, let's say, for 6%, 3 and 3, right? So they've agreed, the seller has agreed in the listing agreement, they're going to give the listing agent a total of 6%, and that 3% of that is going to be given to the buyer's agent. So it's all going to be funneled. It's going to start with the listing agent, and then 3% will be funneled down to the buyer's agent. If that is your situation, and when you are showing a property, you call and you say, what are they offering? They're offering 3. And so you submit your offer, and then you submit the 2402 compensation agreement between brokers, and they sign it, and it's 3. You will leave this blank. You will not put anything there. Okay. It'll all be handled outside of the contract between the listing agent and the buyer's agent. The only place it'll be referenced in this contract will be on page 10, where it says disclosure pursuant to a separate previous agreement, the listing broker has agreed to pay other broker a fee of blank. This disclosure is for informational purposes and does not change the previous agreement between brokers to share a commission. So that amount should match the amount on the 2402 agreement between brokers. Okay. So that's the case if all of the buyer's commission is being paid directly from the listing agent per the listing agreement. And where it's mentioned here, when it says brokerage fees that buyer has agreed to pay, what that is in reference to, now we know we have to have a buyer's rep before we show a property, right? So that's linking it back to the buyer's rep. Okay, so when would you fill out this blank, this B, 12B? Let's say it's a situation where the listing agreement is for 3%. They've said, yes, listing agent, I'm going to pay you 3%, but I'm not going to say up front whether I'm going to pay all, what or anything I'm going to pay to the buyer's agent. I want to see what my offers look like. Okay, so you have a listing, you have a showing, someone's interested in giving you, bringing an offer, and you tell the buyer's agent, no, they're not offering anything in per the listing agreement, but if you're interested, put it in the offer, and we'll see what we can do. So they submit an offer, and they've got a 3% buyer's rep, so they want to get that. They want the seller to cover that. So they would put the 3% here, in paragraph 12. So that money would be coming, that buyer's agent commission would be coming directly from the seller to the buyer's agent, not through the listing agent. So if it's through the listing agent, you're going to have that 2402. So there'd be no 2402 because there's the listing agreement only has a 3% fee that the listing agent is keeping. But the seller, it's a really good offer, and the seller's ready to sell it. So they say, okay, yeah, we'll sign this contract and we will pay 3% to the buyer's agent. So that's going to be in what you're going to put in this situation. Okay, so they're going to pay it directly. Down here, pursuant to a separate agreement, there isn't a separate agreement. You're not using a 2402 compensation agreement between buyers. I'm sorry, between agents, because all of the buyer's agent amount is coming directly from the seller. So you've got the 3% up here, nothing down there. Okay, third scenario. Let's say the listing, when you did your listing agreement, they said, okay, we want to pay you 3% because you're gonna, market this for us, etc. And we'll pay the buyer's agent 2%. Okay. So you get an offer, you've had the conversation with the buyer's agent, and they said, what are you offering? And they said, well, in the listing agreement, they've set to offer 2%. Okay. So they submit their offer, and they've got a 3% buyer's rep, and they're trying to get that extra percentage back to make them whole, right? So the buyer doesn't have to come out of pocket to pay the buyer's agent. They want to try to get that from the seller still. So in that situation, what you would do, you would have the 2402 agreement between brokers, that you're going to have down on page 10, and you're going to put 2% there because that's in the listing agreement. So that's going to be funneled through the listing agent to the buyer's agent. But they're trying to get that extra percent. So you would put 1% here, that extra 1%. So 1% of the commission would be coming directly from the seller, and 2% would be coming, would be done between the agents. Does that make sense?
Yes, Angela, I have a question.
Yeah. Hey, George.
Hey, how are you?
Good.
What if somebody puts in, leaves this blank
Uh-huh.
and they don't get a broker-to-broker compensation agreement signed, and they just put
Mhm.
3% down at the very bottom, under the execution page?
Well, legally, it's for information purposes only, right? And they don't have a separate agreement, but good faith in the industry, I would say that is the intent is, and you've told them you're offering, 3%
Right.
or whatever, you should do it. And I think our compliance department will make you do it.
Yeah, so, okay, that's one question. The other question is what if the client has received, the seller has received multiple offers and they're trying to get to a net?
Mm-hmm.
Even though they said they're gonna pay 3% to the buyer's agent, they say, well, maybe we can adjust that and maybe only pay 2%, for example. How would you handle that?
So you've got a listing agreement like for 6%, and now they're saying they want to have 5. Is that right?
Correct. Uh-huh.
Um, I would say you could amend your listing agreement, okay, to 5, but specify it's only for that buyer, because you don't want to now permanently, be in an assist, say, for a transaction for, buyer Angela, the listing amount will be 5% with 3% to me and 2% to Angela's agent for all other
Yeah,
parties.
where would
Because
you
if
put that
that
link?
falls through, then if they still want to, be offering 3%.
I see. And where would you put that language in the amendment or somewhere else?
There's an amendment to listing agreement form.
Okay, so you put it in there, the language.
Mhm.
on-
But again,
on-
I would, for your protection, limit it just to that specific buyer.
Gotcha, okay.
Okay.
Perfect.
Hey, guys, it is after 10. I will keep going, but I know that some of you maybe have to go. One second, I'm just before people drop off, I want to make sure I have everyone's names, but I'm going to keep going. Um, and again, if you need credit, just um, put your name in the and number, license number in the chat, and then I'll post the QR code again. Okay. Whoops, let me keep on going. I know I need to make this class an hour and a half, I think. Sorry guys. Here we go. Okay. Moving on. We're almost done. It's the last biggie. Let's see. Prorations, this is just saying that, and the title company does all this math. They'll figure out, to the day, how much the property taxes are, etc. So, and that if you close before usually it's around October 1st when like the tax rates come out, they will, if you close before then and or the tax rates may change or there's a big jump in the property value, that you're agreeing that the two parties after closing um, will adjust the prorations. And this is really not for you to get involved in. It's after closing. What you can do is connect them with the title company, and usually the title companies will do that math. So, but then the parties usually will reach out directly to one another. So, you shouldn't be involved in those negotiations, but you can kind of help coordinate. Casualty loss: if any part of the property is damaged by fire or other casualty during the contract period, seller shall restore it to its previous condition. But if they can't do so, then the buyer may either terminate the contract, extend the time of performance 15 days, or accept the property in its damaged condition with an assignment of insurance property. So, we've had these situations, as we've had tornadoes, hailstorms, etc. happen. I will tell you the last option, the accept the property in the damaged condition with assignment of insurance proceeds, is hard to do. Most lenders aren't gonna do it. So, but I mean, another option is you can just keep on extending the contract too. So this is beyond what's offered here. Default, the parties will be in default. You can enforce specific performance, or you can receive earnest money as liquidated damages. Of course, the earnest money as liquidated damages is the easiest option. And specific performance is very, very hard to enforce. That means forcing someone to sell or buy a house, selling them, forcing them to perform on the contract. I will tell you, we did have a lawsuit about a year ago where a seller sued a buyer who failed to close, sued them for specific performance. Which in reality, it's never going to happen. You can't make someone buy a property, but what it did do is it created leverage. And instead of, the seller had already offered the buyer had already offered that the seller could keep their earnest money. But the seller was like, no, you've damaged me. I'm going to make you do this. ended up, because of the specific performance suit, which, had to go to mediation, etc., the seller ended up, I mean, it was a jerk move, but the seller ended up getting about 10 times more than the earnest money, by doing the specific performance lawsuit. So, yeah. Mediation. So you should try to mediate and resolve without going to sue everyone. And so is what this is. Escrow, just reiterating that the escrow agent, the title company, is not a party to the contract. And they don't want to make decisions on everything. That's why they want releases, etc. And federal requirements, this used to be called federal tax requirement. This is FERPTA, which is the foreign person. If you're a foreign person, you have to register, and a sales tax. They withhold, if it's a foreign seller, they withhold you're required by the IRS to withhold substantial amounts of the proceeds, just to make sure that they're going to satisfy their tax obligations. Notices, always make sure this is filled in when you get a contract and the other side is not filled in. Please ask them to fill it in, because when you're trying to provide notices under the contract and you don't have any names, etc., it's kind of hard to do. I also advise that, in addition to copies to you and the other agent, get an email for the seller or the buyer, just because and you want your seller and buyer info in there as well, just because it's not all on you. You're the one you're having to then be responsible for all of the notice. They need to have some accountability in here. This is the documents that are attached to the contract, common ones, third party, etc. There was a new form that came out in this last batch of contract changes, which is this addendum for a 1031 like kind exchange. It's a real simple document. If you are doing the 1031, it will need to be attached. Other things, for whatever reason, sale non-realty items isn't on there, so you always need to add that. And again, because Section 12 made all those changes regarding agent compensation, we don't have to do the 2406 addendum regarding broker's fees anymore. And then broker information. And again, this previous separate agreement is the 2402 agreement between brokers. Used to, it said in that it mentioned MLS, because what was in MLS was considered a binding agreement, but now that's no longer. They took that out and just mentioned the separate agreement. So anyway, that is the class. So any questions? Well, I thank y'all for coming today, and seriously, don't hesitate to reach out whenever you have questions. I'm around, and I hope you have a great short week.
Thank you so much.
Bye, guys.
Thank you so much.
Mm-hmm.